History 102, Reconstruction Interpretations. When you study the historiography of Reconstruction, the Reconstruction period, there are two definite, stark, different interpretations and views of Reconstruction. And I'd like to go over those now. From the 1880s, probably up until about the 1980s, the predominant narrative or interpretation of Reconstruction focused on Reconstruction of the South. Okay. It was called Radical Reconstruction because it was viewed that Reconstruction went too far. The federal government and Republicans in Congress went too far. Reconstruction is generally viewed as a corrupt, as they put there, a corrupt overextension of federal power, where African American voters and elected officials were pawns of a corrupt Republican Northern government. Reconstruction was oppressive, tyrannical, disenfranchised, Southern Democrat white voters, forced things on them socially, violated the Constitution and violated the constitutional limitations of limited government. In this predominant narrative for about a century, from roughly the 1880s about the 1980s, this point of view held that slavery is an issue, and as a cause of the Civil War was downplayed and minimized. It looked to other issues like states' rights, the North violating the Constitution, the North being corrupt and tyrannical and oppressing the South. And so slavery as a cause and an issue of the Civil War tended to be downplayed or minimized or ignored even. Okay. This predominant point of view that most people were taught in school. For example, if you were in a college class, a college U.S. history class, up until from about the 1880s to 1980s roughly, you would be taught this interpretation of Reconstruction. The romantic narrative of this historiography, this interpretation, was that the Confederate States, the 11 states that left the Union, that the Confederate States of America heroically defended the South against Union invasion and tyranny, even when it appeared that the cause was lost, even when it looked like the North was going to win. Okay. This interpretation likes the title of War of Northern Aggression. The War of Northern Aggression. The North invaded. The North oppressed. The Northern states violated the Constitution repeatedly for 20 years or more. The North foisted upon the Southern states tyrannical policies, not just on slavery, but economically, tariffs, and other issues. And so, bad Northern Republicans punished, tyrannized, and oppressed the good Southern Democrats. Okay. This interpretation is more sympathetic to the South, the Confederacy. It's our heritage. It was an honorable war. We were honorably, patriotically fighting, just like patriots, just like the patriots in the American Revolution were fighting British power. We were heroically fighting a tyrannical government, just like our forefathers did in the American Revolution. They fought against a tyrannical government and won. We unfortunately were fighting against a tyrannical, evil, corrupt government that repeatedly violated the Constitution. We lost, but we still heroically fought. An early movie that really solidified this interpretation with the public, with the American public, was Birth of a Nation in 1915. Birth of a Nation is actually considered to be one of the first full-length motion pictures. I mean, it is a silent film, but it was going to be one of the first full-length motion pictures. You know, like, hey, this is a new technology. This is something new, a new form of entertainment, a movie, right? And so, you know, it's shared widely, and so the plot and theme of Birth of a Nation is exactly that: heroic South, heroic Confederate South, defending themselves against corrupt, evil Northerners and Republicans who want to use black people to oppress the South. So in this interpretation, African American or black individuals are pawns to be used to oppress poor Southerners. Right. Historians today call this the lost cause myth. So if you ever hear the lost cause myth, that's kind of what they're talking about. Is this romantic idea? The general picture is more sympathetic to the Confederacy. Slavery, racial issues in slavery are downplayed or minimized, right? And this is the predominant narrative for a good last century. You find it today too. It's still around today. You still see it today. So when I say 1980s, I mean like when was the predominant narrative. Like, for example, I went to elementary school and high school in the 80s, so you know I got some of this. So like when I was in school, it was called radical Reconstruction, implying that the South went. The North Union government, the government went too far. It was too radical. It went too far. Okay, and so like I believe I said this in class that it's called radical Reconstruction. Reconstruction was radical. It went too far. It tyrannized the South. It oppressed the South. It was corrupt, hugely corrupt. It was bad. It was evil. It was went too far. All right. Along the lines of this romantic ideal, you might say, we want to look at what was going on in the 1910s and the 1930s, about 100 years ago. Okay. During these couple of decades of the 19-teens and 20s and 30s, the Civil War generation was dying. Okay? The war ended in 1865, right? So 1875, 85, 95, 5, 15. So like 1915, that's 50 years after the Civil War. Okay? The Civil War generation was dying off. Okay? And Americans at the time, both North and South, American culture at the time, sought to reconcile the wounds from the Civil War. And so, as part of this, generation dying off, you have somewhat of a nostalgic look at the past. And so, if you look at the Civil War as kind of this idea of, brothers fought against brothers, we had an argument, brothers fought against brothers, the North and the South heroically and honorably fought for their cause. The North won and the South lost. Some states, all over the United States, a lot of states, a lot of cities, especially in the South, built what are actually called reconciliation monuments. Today they're called Confederate statues because the media wants you to look at them negatively. They want you to look at them negatively, so they call them Confederate statues. What they were set up as reconciliation monuments. As the Civil War generation was dying off, various cities all over the country, especially in the South, created these monuments to reconcile, to heal the wounds of the Civil War. We're a union again, and also to move on to it's over, it's done. People are dying off. We're moving on to a new generation, and also to kind of close that chapter of American history. Like, okay, it's the past, right? And so a lot of these reconciliation monuments were set up as kind of a memorial to the closing of a chapter. We need to reconcile. We no longer should have these divisions. Kiss and make up. We should, move on from the era. We're in a new century. We're in a new era. So let's move on. And again, like I mentioned, they're reconciliation monuments. They're a monument to an America that wants to forgive, that wants to reconcile, that wants to progress, move on. Okay, close a chapter, close a painful chapter in American history. Again, today they're called Confederate statues because the media wants you to think a certain way. The media doesn't want you to view these reconciliation monuments as a good thing. They want you to view it negatively. So the word Confederate's a bad word, so they're going to call it Confederate statues. So you will support tearing them down. We're going to tear down your statues. Okay. And so these are some pictures. These are some examples of it. As the years went on after the Civil War, veterans of the Civil War started having, reunions. And it wasn't just Union soldiers and Confederate soldiers. They started meeting with each other. Like, for example, every year, the soldiers that fought at the Battle of Gettysburg, which is what this one is, they would meet. Like if you fought in the Battle of Gettysburg, North or South, come to our reunion. And so this is an example of the reconciliation. You had, on one side you had Union veterans, and on the other side you had Confederate veterans, and they're shaking hands, they're reconciling. We were brothers, we fought on the battlefield, and we're still brothers afterwards. And so you see this example here of that reconciliation. Okay, another example, another reunion, a former Union officer and a former Confederate officer, meeting and reconciling. We're brothers still. Okay. And here's another example of a Union officer and they've gotten to know each other over the years. So we're forgiving. There's redemption. There's mercy. There's forgiveness, and you move on to the next stage in your life. Really quick before we move to the more recent interpretation, I was showing you previous, Confederate Union soldiers, reunions. There's an interesting story I want to talk about. There's a lady, Lucy Nichols Higgs. She was an African American lady she was born a slave, grew up in slavery. During the Civil War, she escaped slavery and joined an Indiana unit, a unit of Union soldiers from Indiana. And during the Civil War, in the middle of the Civil War, 1862, She stayed with this unit with her daughter, and she became a nurse. They started having her just be a nurse. You take care of the wounded and all that. And so Lucy, during the Civil War, she had escaped slavery, and she joined this Indiana regiment unit as their nurse. After the Civil War, as these reunions are taking place, she was invited to the reunions. The other soldiers around her, she was a part of their unit, and so they had her as part of the, they come to the reunion. Here's the problem, though. Since Lucy she wasn't registered with the military. She didn't join the military. She was a runaway slave who just happened to stick with a Union regiment from Indiana, and they just kind of, they kept her with them, and she just traveled with them and fought with them, and she was a nurse, but nothing official was ever done to register her, record her, or to be actually an official part of the unit. And the problem with that is, after the Civil War, when you had people applying for pensions, your Civil War pension, she applied but was rejected. And the reason she was rejected was you don't exist. There's no record of you. You're no record of you. And so what she ended up having to do was all of the members of her regiment, and this is a reunion photo where all the members of her regiment had to write letters saying, she was a slave, she ran away, she joined their unit, she became a nurse, she was just a nurse. She, helped the wounded, got food, trained, helped the wounded. So she was a part of the unit. And so this is an interesting picture. She's a veteran too, kind of a thing. She came to their unions, and so this is obviously a lot later years. She takes a picture, and she's a part of the gang, I guess you could say. Next, reassessment. Since the 1980s, a different interpretation has developed, or did develop. It's a reassessment of the predominant narrative of the past 100 years or so, previous to the 80s. A kind of reassessment of the lost cause myth, kind of a thing. This reassessment, it started in the 60s. It became more prevalent as you got into the 1990s and early 2000s. So, for example, when I went to graduate school in the late 90s, the reassessment was happening. One of my Reconstruction books I read talked about Reconstruction of the nation as a whole. So it was a broader view. It was a broader view of Reconstruction. This reassessment critiques what is called the lost cause myth. The focus is Reconstruction of the nation as a whole. And so whereas the lost cause idea, or the lost cause interpretation, focuses on Reconstruction of the South and how evil and tyrannical it was, this reassessment looks at how Reconstruction was viewed as a whole, as the whole nation. The whole nation was reconstructed. The whole country was different after the Civil War than it was before. This reassessment looks at the development and the limitations of the extension of civil rights to African American individuals, and so this is why historians today prefer to call it congressional reconstruction, right? Previous generations of historians, it was radical. Congress went too far. Okay, so we're going to call it radical reconstruction. The reassessment today in our modern day era, current day era, the argument of how radical Reconstruction was, is it didn't go far enough. Okay, and so the focus on this reassessment is the limitation of black civil rights, African American civil rights. In this view, or in this interpretation, like I mentioned here, Reconstruction is generally viewed as well-intentioned, but ultimately a failed attempt to integrate African Americans into society and the South into the larger economy. And so it's viewed as well-intentioned, but ultimately not successful. So you get that difference. The previous interpretation, the lost cause interpretation, Reconstruction was not well-intentioned. Reconstruction did succeed in oppressing the South and tyrannizing the South and violating people's constitutional rights. Okay. In this more current day view, Reconstruction is viewed as well-intentioned instead of ill-intentioned, and while there are some successes, it was generally a failed attempt to integrate African American individuals in society. In this reassessment, slavery is the sole or primary cause or motivation of the Civil War. And so the focus on slavery. So in this romantic narrative, the romantic version of this narrative is that the good Union, the good northern states, the pure and holy northern states saved America, saved African Americans from the bad, evil Confederacy. So you can kind of see how it flips, right? The romantic narrative here is that the pure and holy North, the pure and holy Union, they had correct political and social views. They saved the Union. Okay? For those evil, treasonous, bad Confederates. Right? And so it's kind of a flipped interpretation of the lost cause, where the bad guy in the lost cause interpretation, the bad guys are the North, the good guys are the South. In this interpretation, the good guys are the Northerners, bad guys are the Southerners. The biggest critique, the number one critique of this reassessment is it is extremely presentist. It is extremely focuses on present day views and attempts to foist them on the past. It condemns the past for being the past. And, so in other words, this interpretation, the biggest issue with it is, instead of trying to understand the past, this reassessment wants to relitigate the Civil War and dig up dead people and put them on trial. Their major crime being they don't have 2024 views on social and political issues. How dare you? How dare you? How dare you? How dare you have 19th century? How dare a 19th century person have 19th century views on things? And so the biggest issue with this reassessment interpretation is it's extremely present. You're not trying to understand the past. You're trying to condemn the past so you can feel better about yourself. Okay. Previous generations viewed Reconstruction more politically as a political issue. Modern day reassessment focuses on gets obsessed with race and racial issues. And so, in some ways, this reassessment is highly divisive, extremely divisive, extremely unforgiving, no reconciliation. Like no reconciliation. The dead have to be punished again. It's so in some ways it's like, you want to dig up dead people and punish them again. How dare you have 19th century views on things, you 19th century person. So that's the biggest critique of it. Why, what the issues with it is. I think it's more important to understand the past than condemn it. I think it's important to be fair I think it's important to have a sense of balance, and to try to understand the past on its own terms rather than distorting and using the past so you can feel better about yourself. The other issue with this reassessment is it's used politically. So the people that hype this, the people that really focus on this interpretation, they want you to think a certain way politically. They want you to make certain political decisions. And so they use the past as a political weapon to get you to vote a certain way or support certain political policy decisions. And I personally, as a historian, view that as inappropriate. So anyway, so those are two different interpretations of Reconstruction.